Okay, quick update. What we're going to do now is just look at a couple of changes I've made to the board. I've actually marked the German victory conditions now. You can see them with these coloured counters. So to achieve a minor German victory, you've basically got to capture all of each colour group. So there's reds, yellows. You only have to capture one colour group, but you have to capture every counter in the colour group. So you've got red, green, blue, yellow, and finally purple. Now, to get a German complete victory, you basically got to be able to get a unit across the Meuse. I don't think it even has to be supplied. Right, we'll have a look at a couple of other things while I'm here. Let's start with stacking. Oh, one comment about the rules. When I originally looked at the rules, I was sort of saying, oh wow, no, these look really, really difficult and everything. But actually, as you get further into the rules, you realise there's a lot of exceptions. And there's lots of rules for really fairly small number of German units, and quite a lot of rules which are very specific to certain times, especially early on in the game. So as I get into the bits I've looked at recently, which is stacking, zones of control, movement, I can see that, and substitute artillery units, I can see that the rules are actually getting a lot easier to take into, basically to memorise. So first things like zones of we won't do zones of control first, we'll do stacking. If I can find the section on stacking, I should have prepared this earlier. Right, normal unit stacking. There's a chart on the play aid which pretty much details all the stacking. I've got a bit of glare here, so you can get rid of that. So this one details the stacking. So you're basically saying the only things that don't stack really are like the bridges and play aids, and stacking restrictions cause eliminations and disruptions. You can also get stacking situations forced by retreats, and it mentions that the combat stacking chart is provided on the play aid. Now this is pretty straightforward. Like HQs, it's like one per echelon. So I suppose you could have all 4 echelons of your HQs in a single hex. You've got frontline units, tend to be 3 per hex. We'll discuss artillery substitutes in a minute, which are 1 per hex. There are some special German things, and there's some special allied rules as well, but it doesn't look, well, it isn't particularly onerous, let's say that. If we look at artillery substitute units, it's quite interesting. There's a lot of German artillery on the board, and I mean a lot. If you look around here, for example, you can see all those field artillery units with the NATO symbol with just the dot in the middle. Below that, you've got your rocket launchers, Nebelwerfers and things. So even in that small area there, look, there's more artillery units there, more and more. There's another group of artillery units there. So there's a lot of them on the board. Now what they've done is they've created this system where you can have these replacement counters. So if you look at this German, God, these glares annoying. If we look at these German units here at the top, you've got the 405th Artillery Corps Level Artillery Support Group, and that's got 5 units in it, and it's also got an artillery replacement counter. So what you do, if you're using the artillery replacement counters, instead of having those 5 units, you stick the replacement counter in the starting position, which is hex 9007. And as you can see, the artillery counter, it doesn't have a numeric value for its attack factor, which is the one on the extreme left. It has an asterisk. Okay, and you also see that the range, which is in the white circle, is also an asterisk. So what happens is, in terms of the game, all 5 of those units are in the same hex. Now when I fire, what I do is I come back to this chart, and then I can say, right, I'm going to fire with these. I can add them all up. Say they're all firing at the same target. I could have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and I could fire them all at a range of 5, but I could only fire one of them at a range of 12, if you see what I mean. I don't know whether I'm going to use that, and it's something I probably should have done starting the game, because you can imagine as the battle progresses and you get more aircraft and stuff coming into the game, that you don't really want all your artillery stacked in one place, because you can get disrupted by aerial assault and or even by counter bombardment. We'll leave that for the moment. Next thing, zones of control. Zones of control are pretty straightforward as well. Zones of control in this game are different. Not every single unit has a zone of control, and also zones of control change depending on the ground conditions. So if we look at the zone of control chart, you can see that you've got zones of control that are dependent on the types of terrain, like woods, clear, broken. And when it says into, it's obviously they're projected into that. And so an infantry and engineering unit has zones of control projecting into all types of terrain. But if we look at something like a light anti-aircraft artillery, that has no zone of control into anything. This is quite good. I like this. And you don't often see zones of control varying as much as they're doing here. And then you've got your atmospheric conditions, which are also changing the way zones of control operate. Okay, there's nothing epic about zones of control in this game. Basically, if you enter one, you've got to stop. Now, you've got to stop your movement. You can start in a zone of control of an enemy unit and move into the zone of control of a different one and then stop. But you can't move directly from one hex in a zone of control of a certain unit to another hex in the zone of control of the same unit. The only way you can do that is move out and then move back in, which is unusual. There are penalties for trying to retreat into enemy zones of control, and also they restrict your advance after combat. But there's nothing really unusual about that. Finally, I'll cover movement, which yet again is fairly straightforward. You've got strategic movement, which is combined to roads, and there's a special road movement chart which is different. There you see you've got your normal road movement chart, which is different from your off-road movement chart. Now your off-road movement chart is not only dependent on the type of units, but as you can see here, you've got these green, brown and blue. It says what that particular hex costs depending on the ground conditions. Green is firm, brown is mud, and blue is frozen. Okay, so there are other rules affecting movement depending on whether it's night, whether it's fog, dense fog, whether it's snow, etc. But I've read through most of them, and I think they're pretty straightforward again. So that will do for today's. Oh, one thing to look at is traffic jams. To simulate the chaos on the 16th of December, you can see that there are German traffic jam problems that are encountered in the various army areas. 6th Panzer Army, 1st SS Corps, and depending where you are, there's like a restriction or a reduction in the ability of German units to move, because you've basically got all these divisions trying to plough their way through across the same bridges, down the same roads, etc. There's special rules for the morning where it's really bad, and then there are rules for the afternoon and evening of the 16th as well, where there's a lot of chaos on the German side. Americans don't really have that problem because they're spread all over the place, and they're just going to get roll stomped if they're not careful. Now, there are other restrictions on movement that come in, which I'll just mention before we give it a make the end of this particular video. You've got overruns depending on certain odds and certain circumstances. You've got interdiction by aircraft, special artillery rules for moving, because you've basically got to go into march order to move. Same with HQs, they've got to go into march order to move. There are other problems that the Germans have, particularly with fuel. Their fuel situation gets worse and worse as the game goes on. And to be honest, if they run out of fuel, the Panzers run out of fuel, you're actually restricted to 1 hex per turn in movement until you re-establish supply of fuel. Quick reminder on movement, which we did discuss slightly. Here's some counters. We've got an artillery unit. This artillery unit is in road mode currently. It's a motorised unit, and it has a movement of 8. You can see that on the right hand side. The number next to the 8 is the number of movements it takes to switch it into battery mode. When it's in battery mode, as you can see, its movement disappears. Costs 2 to switch it back into road mode, and it also, on the upper right, you can see it has a range now because it can fire. HQs, similar. You have an HQ has a road mode, which is, this one is actually has a cross-country motorised capability. You can see the 3 wheels under the HQ thing. It can move off-road. It has movement allowance of 9, and it costs its 1 to switch it into what's called HQ mode. When it's in HQ mode, it's top right hand corner, its command radius doubles and it loses its ability to attack. It can only defend itself. Its movement becomes 0 in this mode, and it takes 1 to switch it back into road mode. Other units we could have a look at. Tanks. This one is just a normal AFV. If it was a heavy AFV, it will have a little asterisk next to the center combat effectiveness box, that white box. And heavy armor has restrictions on bridge crossing and movement in certain circumstances. This one has a movement of 8. Its reverse side is just a step loss. And finally, an infantry unit, movement of 7, just bog standard leg infantry. This is a specific counter for Allied Chaos, but it doesn't really matter. That's what's got snafu on it. Reverse side is also just a step loss, so it has a movement of 7 on the other side as well. Okay, right, that's it. That's enough for today.